Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Larry today. Larry's an individual that reached out to me. He's a listener, and he's got some interesting things to share. Larry, let's get right into it. You can take us back to when things started happening for you.
I was working for the Coast Guard in Ketchikan, and I was looking for a property. I had fallen in love with Prince of Wales Island, and I really wanted to live there. I was going to retire for a second time, and I just thought it would be the greatest place in the world to ride things out. And anyway, a friend of mine at the base that I worked with, he came up one day and said, "Hey, this property hasn't hit, they haven't advertised it or anything. Maybe you'd want to go over and look at this one." And it looked beautiful. I mean, it looked like just what I was looking for. So I had gotten back in touch with who I've married since, my wife, Monica. And so we were excited. We were going to go over there and look at this property. So we had just enough time to get on the ferry. And we took the 3-hour ride over to Hollis. And the place we were going to was South Thorn Bay. So this was in the summer. So I'm guessing this was probably July or August. And we drove out to South Thorn Bay, and we were going to overnight at a place called Richardson's Landing, which you can look across from Richardson's Landing. And I had slept in my car there a couple times, just going over there, spending the weekend and fishing or just looking at things. And you could look across the bay and see Thorn Bay. Oh, there's quite a few properties that were sold by the state over there. A lot of them were undeveloped. They don't have property taxes there, so people can sit on those properties for a long time and not be penalized for it. And anyway, so we had still quite a bit of daylight when we got to Thorn Bay. It was probably an hour and a half from the ferry terminal, South Thorn Bay, and at Richardson's Landing. So we thought, well, let's go out here and see if we can find this house. You know, it's still daylight enough. And so we took off, drove right to it. It was probably 5 or 6 miles down a dirt road, not a very good road, but there were houses there and some really nice houses that had been built there. And you could see that some people had put properties in. Some people had more resources than others and worked harder at it. So there were beautiful homes, you know, and some people were just getting by. And anyway, whatever people were capable of doing. So we get to this house, we recognized it instantly, and I was supposed to meet with an old guy there in the morning, and we dropped into the property because we knew nobody would be there. I had talked to the owner. I got him on the phone. He was up in Anchorage. And so we walked over, and the first thing we noticed is the porch had fallen some, and that was going to need to be repaired. And it was very clear that this house had not been lived in years, which in southeastern Alaska, it's kind of a deal. You know, it's good to have somebody staying in a house with all that rain and moisture and stuff and keeping the house heated and dry. Anyway, so Monica went to look through the window, and I took a quick peek in the window too, and it looked pretty good inside. Anyway, I thought I would go around and look at the water catchment system at the end of the porch. And I stepped down off the porch, and it didn't have a very big tank. And I remember all the lines and stuff had moss growing in them, and they had broken apart. And I was like, well, that's going to need to be repaired, you know. And I was kind of cooling off about the idea of this house already. There was a large shop on the property. And anyway, I looked around the water catchment system, And then about 20 feet from there was the edge of the manicured part of it. And it dropped off into the woods. So this had been logged. It was all second growth timber. And it had been logged maybe back in the 60s because the trees are pretty big. There were some 2-foot trees in there. And I walked over to the edge of the property and I could hear something down in there. And it was maybe 100, 200 yards. It was hard to place how far it was. But it was a conversation that was going on. I strained at first to be like, there's people down. What on earth would people, it's getting dark. I mean, what on earth would people be doing down in there? And then I couldn't make out any of the words. And then I realized that this wasn't a conversation that people were having, that there was like 3 of these things down there, possibly 4. And anyway, it just sounded like gibberish and there were whoops and hollers thrown in there. It's like they're all talking at each other, talking over each other. And I remember listening there and just making myself listen, trying to figure what it was, and just having this overwhelming feeling and a voice in my head that said, leave now. And anyway, I turned around and I went back up on the porch, and Monica had walked around to another side of the house. And I said, hey, hon, I don't think we're going to buy this house. Let's go get in the car and, let's take off. And she said, no, I want to go check out the shop over there. And so we had to walk by the car, and I just like went up and like, okay, get in the car. Come on, we don't need to look at the shop. And she's just being herself, she's super curious about things. And so that it had all stopped, and I told her, I hear something down in the woods, I'm pretty uneasy about it. I want to take off. I don't think we should hang around. And she said, no, I would just give me a minute, look in the shop. And she didn't feel any of this anxiety that I had felt about this. And so she stuck her head inside the shop, and it had been filled up full of logging equipment that was like in ruins. I don't have any idea why somebody would put the things in that shop that were in that shop. Like, it was almost filled to the ceiling with stuff. Like, I looked in there over her shoulder, and she had her head in there, and the whole thing down in the woods started again, and I could hear it clearly again. I said, honey, I want you to hear something. And I pulled her out. I said, can you hear that? And she looked at me and she says, no, I don't hear anything. I'm like, okay. Well, then she was satisfied with what she's seen. And, I moved her back off toward the car and got her in the car, and away we went. But that was probably the closest thing I have ever had to an encounter, actually. But I can't tell you 100% what it was. I've heard sandhill cranes up there. They make a kind of an odd racket when they're conversing back and forth and doing their mate and stuff. And I thought, well, it wasn't that, that feeling of being just overwhelmed with feeling like I was in immediate danger. I can tell you, I have spent a tremendous amount of time outside. Like I'm the guy that hunts every day of the hunting season, and just never really felt at not being at ease in the woods, just except one other time in Idaho. And I was just hunting up off of Highway 12 up the Locksaw River, and I was quite a ways up on the side of the mountain and got a feeling very similar to that. And I was just like, everything was just dead quiet. Like, the woods are not dead quiet if you take the time to listen. And, you're trying to be a part of the environment when you're hunting. And I had a rifle with me, and I was just like, oh, I just do not want to be here. And down the mountain I went and walked back up the highway with my rifle back to my pickup. But those were the only two times that I ever really felt incredibly not welcome. That's a good way to put it. I didn't really feel welcome. So,
Larry, that is an incredible account from Prince of Wales Island. There's some really interesting things that happen on that island. And thank you for adding what happened to you to the list for sure. What year again was this that you experienced this on the island?
Oh, I guess that was probably 18, 19. It wasn't that long ago.
It was like 2019.
So, and our church, yeah, our church has pastors come in every year from different places, and we host them and put them up and stuff, and they speak to the congregation. And one of them he was from Mexico City, and he was like, "Hey, I've heard there's a lot of Bigfoot stuff going on this island." And anyway, I told him my story about that place. He's like, "Come on, Larry, let's go out there." So I spent the day with Pastor Dave, and we went out there. Well, when I went out there with Pastor Dave, now this would have been 2 years ago, they had the state, I'm guessing it was the state, they had developed a road, and now there was at least 2 houses that had been built behind the property that we were looking at. So those woods are no longer just like the end of the road and down in there. So, there's other stuff there now. And so it's not a wild into the unknown place exactly anymore. I don't know. Maybe at the end of the lower road there now, maybe. But yeah, they built some stuff. And I remember listening to your conversation with a guy named Dylan. He was in the logging industry.
Absolutely.
You remember Dylan?
Oh yeah. I've still been talking to Dylan on the side.
So Dylan talked about the Cardiff River. So one of my friends, he's a contractor, builds houses. He told me about an experience he had up the Cardiff.
Oh, really?
Cardiff River. Yeah, he said it turned out to be a fisherman, but he said he was absolutely positive he was looking at a Sasquatch in the river. The sockeye come in, in June. Anyway, but my friends up in Knockety, they did give me permission. I told them I was going to be on your podcast, and they told me that I was welcome to share a couple of the stories they told me about what had happened up in Knockety. And apparently a few years ago, they were building their cabin or upgrading it. And my friend Dean, he has a little sawmill up there. And Dean came from Idaho. So it's just an ironic twist of fate. Dean and I know the same people. So people I ran around with before I left Idaho were people that were Dean's family. But Dean was cutting right away. He runs a saw. He does what he's got to do, but he's got a little sawmill on the property, and he's building a house. And his wife, Juliet, is just one of the most beautiful people. Anyway, Dean would go out and he would run the generator, and then at some point they would get ready to go to bed. And I think this was before their kids came. So this was probably 20 years ago, somewhere in there. And he would go out and turn the generator off with his dog. And he went out to turn the generator off, and something screamed at him on the edge of their property. And Dean said it frightened him and the dog so bad the dog, wouldn't go out. And at least the dog would, always go out and patrol the house. And the dog was, pretty leery about getting too far from the house after that. But they said that scream, and Juliet heard it too. She was waiting for Dean to come in and lights out, and they were getting ready for bed after he turned off the generator. But he said that scream went on for so long, and it was so ear piercing. that he said he'd fill the generator up and just let it run out of gas for like 2 years after that. He was afraid to go out there to turn it off again, which, I don't blame him. But other people in Knockety have similar stories, especially around that same time, that they think it was a female, but they set up at Sarkar Lake. Some people were vacationing up there, or overnighting up there in a camping trip or something, and they heard a very similar scream, just blood curdling, pack your stuff up and go home type stuff, And one of the more interesting things that Dean told me is while he was cutting right away, he said he found a place where there were just bones everywhere. He said it didn't make any sense, the amount of bones that were there. He was just cutting through the brush and there was a little clearing, there were just bones everywhere. He said one of the things that was there was a bear, a large bear carcass that was turned completely inside out. Now, I've thought about what that might look like, and Dean's experienced, but he said it was turned inside out. So I asked him, I said, "Are there any cut marks on it? Was it gutted?" He said, "No, it was just turned inside out." Like, I can't even imagine what might be able to do that or how that would even be done. But it was just laying on the ground. So there's some very large bears on that island. And Dean said it was a big, big bear.
Did Dean happen to mention if it had a broken neck at all?
I don't think it was attached to I think it was just the hide.
Oh.
Like somehow the hide had been ripped off the animal. Yeah, I think that was my take on what he told me anyway.
The time that you spent on the island, the other people I've talked to, they always mention that it's very, Sasquatch is very ingrained into the culture. Is that something that you noticed yourself in the time that you spent on the island?
No, but as far as like the native people and stuff, I have a couple native friends, and it's not something we've gotten into a lot. There was, the tree breaks and stuff. There's a place where there's several of those I found. Just found them, and they're all alder trees, and that's out by Thorn Bay too. And that's kind of mind perplexing to me how that happened. Like those breaks are quite a ways up those trees. Like, yeah, they had to have been bent over to be broken, I guess. But that could very well just be my experience. Like, I just don't know enough people to, when I was down in Idaho, I got to know a lot of Nez Perce people, but I haven't really broke in with the Tlinkits or the Idas. Yeah. I got a friend down in Heidelberg, but he hasn't told me anything really.
So the breaks that you saw up in the trees, how high up would you approximate that those were?
15 feet.
Oh my goodness. 15
to 18 feet. Yeah. And they're not trees you could bend over easily. I mean, they're 4 or 5 inch trees, some of them.
Wow.
So they're maybe a little thin because yeah. And there's several of them. I remember when I found those, I stood there and looked at them, and I had somebody with me. I'm like, what on earth do you suppose happened there? And a lot of people just don't want to like really engage any of that,
Oh, really? Even on the island?
Snow load.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm meeting people on the island. My wife and I have only been there about 4 years. And remember, we hadn't even found a house when the thing happened out in South Thorn Bay. So we were still looking for a place. In fact, the place we found, the Coast Guard movers were a week away from picking my stuff up and moving me to Idaho when the place we bought came open and became available. It was a crazy time, man, trying to put that together.
Did you guys end up staying on Prince of Wales then for a while?
No, in fact, when we found our place, we moved. When the movers came, we knew we were going to purchase that house. And so we were able to buy that house on Prince of Wales Island. We split our property when the movers came and said, this stays, this stays, this stays. And then my wife and I loaded a U-Haul truck, and the people, good people down at the ferry, called me up and said, Larry, are you going to be able to make the ferry? And I was pulling the door down on the back of the U-Haul truck, and we drove across down to the ferry and got on the ferry. We were the last people on the ferry. So, and then we unloaded all our stuff, and just the kindest people in the world, people from the ferry, when they found out we had bought a house there on that island, they came and sat with us back in the galley and welcomed us and told us how much we were going to love the island and how much they've loved living there, and welcome to our community, you know, and all that. It was the nicest thing. And then when they got done docking the boat and lashing the boat up, a couple of them, you know, drove up to Cloak to help us unload the moving truck. So it was just a super thing to experience, to be so welcomed.
That is really cool. I have another question regarding Thorn Bay. Could you tell if what you were hearing was inside your head or with your actual ears?
No, it wasn't inside my head.
Okay.
The whole thing about, you know, we need to leave here now, like right now.
Right.
That was inside my head. But the rest of it was very audible. And I've got some hearing damage from, you know, all the stuff I've done in my life to make a living. But yeah, it was just as plain as could be. And to this day, you know, Monica swears she didn't hear any of it. So that's interesting in itself.
It really is. And it does line up with a few things that I've heard over the years, where sometimes people in an area can hear or experience something. Other people in the party have no idea what they're talking about. Yeah, I've heard that a few times. When you heard the leave, get out now, was that more of an actual voice in your head that you were hearing, or just your inside of you being like, I feel so anxious about this that I need to leave? Was it more of that?
No, it was a clear, audibleized set of distinct words. It was like my voice. I've heard that voice before, but not very often.
Okay.
But yeah, it was just clear. There was nothing wishy-washy about it. It was absolute concise. It's time to go, you know.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Would you say that it was more your internal voice, or did it sound like a totally different voice?
Boy, I don't know. It could go either way.
Sure. Gotcha.
Like, I would say it's more I don't know. I don't know if I could really attach any weight to one side or the other on that, but it was very clear and matter of fact.
After that time, did you have other experiences where you would hear statements or experience them internally after that?
No.
Okay.
No, not really. Like I say, I'm very comfortable being outdoors and stuff. I really enjoy just going out into the natural world and becoming part of it.
You know, I've heard from a few different loggers on this island about things they've experienced. Have you ever heard any hunters that have experienced Sasquatch when they've been out hunting?
No, but yes. Now, I'd have to take you back to Idaho, because I actually spent 27 years in Idaho. And so I can give you something I experienced, and then I can tell you a story that I was close to.
Okay.
And I got it firsthand from the guy that experienced it. So the first one is up by the Montana-Idaho border. There's a place called Elk Meadows. And I used to go up there and stay there's a cabin there. And the book, a river runs through it, and a book called The Ranger, the Cook, and the Hole in the Sky was written by the same author in the same cabin. And anyway, an old couple, I think their name was Stratford. Anyway, I used to go up, and I would spend the night in the cabin with them. There was salt licks outside back before the wolves got reintroduced to Idaho. And the moose would be out there every morning. We'd sit on the porch and drink coffee and watch the moose. And anyway, there was a lake out there, and I had heard, like all fishermen, if you tell me a good enough fishing story about some mythical place, I'm likely to, lose sleep until I can get out there and see it for myself. But there's a lake out there called Duck Lake, and it's maybe a 4.5 mile trek to Duck Lake. So I had planned a trip there with another adult, and we were camping at Hoodoo Lake, which is up at one end of Elk Meadows. And there's a trail that took off behind that cabin that took off in the general direction of Montana, but it'd go up to Mount Diablo. And then from there, they say there's a trail that goes down to that lake, but I don't think there is. So I could see pretty clearly the trail would go up a ridge, and the trail wasn't maintained. There were a lot of deadfall across it. But I could see the basin that Duck Lake was in over across the valley. And this was just a beautifully U-shaped, glacially carved, had trees growing in it. So we made the decision. My brother showed up right before we took off. So there were 3 adults, and there were two kids, and the kids were about 10 years old. And we took off of the trail. We made the decision to cut across there and then climb back up out of that little valley up to the lake. So we took off from the trail, got down into the valley. You could smell the rancid, rotting. It stunk terrible. And I was looking around for, at that point, supposedly the Fish and Game Department hadn't put the grizzly bears back in. But, I was hearing rumors that people had seen them. And anyway, yeah, so, that's another story. But we got down into the bottom. There wasn't a lot of brush in there. It was almost like a park, to walk across this valley. And the valley was only maybe 3/8 of a mile across or so. But there was a terrible smell in there. And the trees are spaced a long ways apart, maybe a lot further apart than you would see even in a healthy forest. But we're getting close to being at the tree line, Mount Diablo, of course, was up above the tree line. So the trees, there was about 300 of these trees in the base of that valley that had been stripped of their bark 360 degrees around, completely stripped. Like they were still green. The needles hadn't even begun to rust and these trees were just weeping pitch, but they had been stripped of their bark. 300 of these trees, probably 12 to 14 feet up. And there again, I just stood there just marveling at what on earth could have caused this. And of course, everyone was looking over their shoulder because of the smell that was in that valley. But nobody, as far as we knew at that time, there were no grizzly bears that had been reintroduced back into Idaho. So yeah, we made our trip, and I've just always wondered that. Of course, those trees have got to still be there, and I think they've got to still be there and still standing. But I think they're probably now that was probably 2000 that happened, the summer of 2000. But I just can't imagine, what possibly could have done that. Like if it was a bear, I can't imagine they could have raked the bark off there. What? I haven't seen, I've seen a lot of claw marks. I've seen cats make claw marks on trees. They do it pretty low. But I just can't imagine what would strip the bark off of those trees. I mean, we weren't even close to the trail at that point. Like we were probably a good half mile from the trail. So there was that. So did you want to say something, hon?
Yeah, I just joined. I was there at the POW incident. Sorry, I just took a bite of my lunch. So my take on it, because I heard you say to Larry, was that a clear, audible voice, or you were asking him?
Sure.
About you need to leave. So I did not hear it, but here's my take on it. We were newlyweds, first of all, and we were either just married or getting married. But anyway, we're looking at the house, and I'm more interested in looking at the house. And I've got my nose up to the window, peeking inside this cabin. And so what I recall looking back on it was when he heard the noise that I did not hear, when he heard the noise and he was letting me know we need to leave. He verbally, outwardly to me said, we need to leave, and we need to leave now. And I'm kind of like, well, wait a minute. I want to look, what women do. I want to look in this location or look in this window. And he's like, no, we need to leave now. And so we get in the car, and that's when he asked me, this is what my recollection of it. That's when he asked me, didn't you hear that? And I was like, no. What? Hear what?
Oh, and you suck your head in the...
Right. I was busy. In other words, what I'm trying to say is I was busy. So
I went over to look at that shop.
Yeah. And so what my take on it is his gut was telling him, rather than the audible voice thing, his gut was telling him, you need to get out of here now. And the reason I think I didn't hear it, because I believe him wholeheartedly, but I think the reason I didn't hear it is, number one, my focus was looking at a cabin that was for sale. And number two, I'm not as in tune to this, especially the Bigfoot stuff that, Larry has shown an interest for that in most of his life. And I'm one of those people that I have no idea what you're talking about. I wasn't an outdoorsman. And so I might have saw a cartoon character or something, you know what I'm saying, about Bigfoot. So my ear is not in tune to that type of whooping sound that he heard. And so for me, it was, I might have heard a forest sound, but it was a forest sound. So it meant nothing to me. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah.
Explain that. Why I didn't hear it and he did, and we were in the same proximity. And so I've often looked back at that going, well, how come I didn't hear it? I'm just not as in tune to a really odd forest sound that he was in tune to.
Absolutely.
So there's my take on it.
Thank you, Monica.
You're welcome.
I'm sure you've heard some of the audio tapes that have been recorded, like in Yosemite, those hunters that had the camp there.
Yeah.
That's an interesting story. Some of what they recorded is what I heard. It was very similar to that.
Okay. So similar to the Sierra Sounds is what we're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty similar to that. But every once in a while I'll see something that somebody's recorded and they'll play and they'll be like, yeah, it wasn't like that, or yeah, there's elements of that I heard. I got a pretty good listen on it, you know, for what it was.
Larry, I have just a few more questions for you, and maybe some kind of random ones here at the end. Do you know anything about a section of Prince of Wales Island called Port Protection?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Lavisher Bay, Port Protection.
Mm-hmm.
I think the guys have to like jump in their boats up there at Lavisher Bay and take off. My grandson and I go hunting up that way sometimes, but I've never actually been to Port Protection.
Okay. Is it a more wooded area or more remote than the other areas on the island in any way?
Well, yeah, you could make a case for it being more remote, but more wooded. There's a lot of woods on that island.
Mm.
There's a lot of it's been logged, and there's still quite a bit of old growth timber there. But even the second growth is coming back.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that area might come into play later on this show. We'll see. I can't really. There might be someone that has something to say about that.
Yeah.
But that'll have to wait for later. The other thing, being on the island, I've heard from some people that there are a lot of missing people cases. Is that maybe something that is over exaggerated, or have you heard things like that?
I haven't. No, I know I don't know. Do you know what a karst is? There's a lot of limestone on the island. And when the limestone erodes, say through just being dissolved by water over time, it can create underground rivers and streams and stuff. And then the surface will collapse in on it. So there's a lot of caves on the island. So I don't know. I think people probably stumble into them or find them when they're out hunting. And people that hunt and get away from their rigs, you know, and really spend their time out there doing it the right way, I think most people come across them. So if somebody had come up missing, it'd be something like that, maybe.
That makes total sense. Yeah.
It hasn't been in our local newspaper in the last, since we've lived there, you know, like, you know, Joe is missing type stuff. So.
And there's a lot of caring people. Like if somebody came up missing, you know, chances are a pretty good team of people would be mustered up to go after them. We did a lot of search and rescue stuff with people in Idaho.
Oh, really?
I've heard from the locals, don't talk about it.
Okay, it's kind of a big deal.
Then again, you know, we're not. Yeah, so a matter of getting networked in. We're just not networked in the way a lot of people are. It's just going to take time to make all those connections. We have a church we go to, and we love our church family. And you know, I've talked to the pastors about what they think maybe I experienced, and you know, their opinion of it is like it's probably more demonic than anything else, and I ought to stay away from it. But I don't know.
We have not heard of missing people, but the natives do. I have heard from other people saying, don't talk to the natives about Sasquatch because it's a taboo subject. So that's the only thing I've ever heard.
That's interesting.
Everything in its time. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One other question, just in case. So when I talk to people about this area, sometimes what comes up is that there are Sasquatch on the island that actually have only 4 toes instead of what you would normally see, and that there might be different groups of them on the island. Is that anything that's ever come up in conversation before while you've been on there?
Well, I can tell you I move pretty slowly when I'm moving through the woods. Like and I'm watching for everything. If I ever do come across some tracks or something, and I'm always
I was
watching.
asking if you've ever heard people talk about that.
No, I haven't.
But Larry, if you do happen to find some tracks up there, I'd love to hear about that too. That would be pretty cool. So either way, for sure.
Well, yeah, I'll absolutely let you know. It could happen. But yeah, how much time have we got left?
I mean, we're about 47 minutes in, so we still have time. If there was something else that you were wanting to make sure that you shared, yeah.
Yeah, so Idaho again.
Okay.
So I was a correctional officer for about 25 years, and I ran a fire crew out of a prison in Orofino for several years of that. But I started there the first week in 1990, and probably 1992 or 93, I was dating a girl, and I really liked her father. Her dad was still out in the woods logging, and I thought, he was somebody that I really admired, and he had lived quite a life, and I really liked hearing about things he had done and experienced. Anyway, every Friday, these old guys, there was 5 of them, and their families had all grown up together, and their wives were the best friends. And these guys on Fridays would get together at somebody's house, and they would have a few beers maybe, and do a barbecue or something. And the women would get together and get caught up, and the guys would, remember when and stuff. So that whole group is a generation ahead of me. And I believe most of them are gone now, but I was there one time, and I had a bit of job in the prison system before I went over and did the fire crew stuff. So I'd only been there about 3 years at the prison. And they asked me, they said, "Hey, is there a guy up at your prison named so-and-so?" And I can't give you his name, but I said, "Yeah, in fact, he's on my unit." And they said, "I'll tell you one thing, he has footage. He showed it to all of us, and he used to be part of us, but they said if we had found out what he did, the cops never would have found him." So he was doing stuff that was, despicable. But they didn't know, until it all broke and they caught him and tried him and all that. So he was close to everybody's families and stuff. He was kind of a part of this group. But he had carried a Super 8 camera with him, one of the old crank jobs, I think. And he got in the habit of carrying it everywhere he went. So this was about the same time when that Patterson-Gimlin film had come out. And of course, Idaho was far less populated then than it is now. So I'm guessing this took place in the late 60s. And anyway, he had a story to tell, and they told me that he had killed an elk back up behind a place called Johnson's Mill, not far from Orofino. And he had gone out there and he had gutted this elk and he got it home. So these old guys told me this story, and they said he got film they said it was a partial cut where, anyway, on this film that he showed them, apparently there was an elderberry bush and he could see something black behind the elderberry bush. And the motivation for all this happened the day after he had killed that elk. He had gotten the elk out. He got home. He realized he didn't have his pocket knife with him. And somehow he's like, okay, I set the pocket knife down on a gut pile. I got to go. So the next day he drove up there. He took the camera with him. He was in the habit of doing, and he was walking down this road, and he sees the elderberry bush out in this partial cut, not far down off of the road he's walking on. The road's behind a lock gate, so he had to leave his pickup back behind a lock gate, and I believe that road's still locked. And I don't, for some other reason, I hunt in other places, but I'd never been down that road. But he left his rig there, and So it's like 33, 34 degrees snow where the stuff is just super big and heavy and it's coming down just in huge flakes. And so he sees this black thing and he thinks, well, I'm going to get some footage of a bear. I'm going to get some footage of a moose. This is going to be great. And he starts cranking the film. And anyway, out from behind this bush steps one of these creatures. And apparently it was absolutely enormous. And the thing was surprised he was there. These guys said that in that piece of film, you could see right in its face that it had decided it was going to kill him. And they said it took like 3 or 4 steps toward him, up toward the road very quickly. And they said you could see right in its face that it changed its mind not to kill him. And so all 5 of these old boys were telling me this story and adding to it, and you think, okay, well, I'm a young guy. I'm a little vulnerable here. They might be just, enjoying yanking on me a little bit here. So anyway, the next day I go up to work and I call the guy up to my window. And I'm like, hey, I heard you seen something back up behind Johnson's Mill. And his eyes got great big, says, what do you want? What do you want to know, Warren? I'll tell you. I was like, tell me every bit of it. So he goes back, just the 2 stories aligned perfectly. And anyway, he apparently filmed it walking all the way out after it decided not to do him harm. It turned around and loped off, in big giant strides off through that clear cut. And he filmed it for, 150 yards. And by the end, it's probably a black dot on the film. But he said that he took that film up, I think it's probably the University of Idaho or the University of Washington. And he showed it to them. They watched it. And, they sent the film back home with him. And so he'd been sitting on it for years and years. Well, his wife was still, she was still living in Orofino. And as a correctional officer, he said to me, I'll call my wife when you get off work, go get that film. He said, there's enough interest in this that people would want to see that. The biggest qualifier of this whole thing, of this thing that I was told, was that these guys said, the 5 guys that told me about it, the old guys, they said, there is no way he was smart enough to hoax something like that. There's just no way. And anyway, I just always just wondered, like, gosh darn it, that film has to exist out there. In the prison system, he wound up being taken to Boise down to hospice, and I believe he passed a cancer. Well, sometimes the state of Idaho turns somebody loose before they pass away, it's expensive to take care of people, that have medical issues that are severe. But yeah, I never met his wife. I never anything, but I just always, that on just the outside chance that maybe his kids got his stuff, that he was able to, they were able to find that film, or maybe they had knowledge of it. If he even had any kids, I don't know. But gosh, I'd just love to see it. And they all told me that clarity of that was way better than the Patterson-Gimlin film. And he told me that he knew he was going to be killed when that thing stepped out from the brush. Mm. He said he thought, well, crap, I'm just going to keep filming this, and hopefully they'll find the camera later,
Oh, that's incredible. So, wow. You imagine thinking like that? I mean, good on him for continuing to film it, though. But I mean, I just hope that someday someone stumbles upon that, or maybe someone listening, maybe he's like, hey, that's my relative. I know what that film is, and feel free to reach out. But wow, that's an incredible story.
Yeah. It really is. That as much as anything got me really paying attention to this stuff. Like, Yeah, I don't know. There's just so many questions there. Like I spent so much time in Idaho's outdoors. The incident with the trees, there was that, where they got stripped, and the thing about just being up on the hill, and there again, that voice you were talking about, leave, get down off here.
Mm.
Let's get out of here. That that like it just came out of nowhere. Like I don't know if it's some kind of something I ate the night before where I wasn't chemically balanced or something, but who knows?
It's hard to say, but have you, since you've looked into this for, more than a few years, have you gotten to a point where you have an idea of what it is that people are dealing with when they have interactions with Sasquatch?
Well, I kind of am of the opinion that if somebody really wanted somebody with some skills, really didn't want to participate in society, that they could drop out of society and they could, do whatever they needed to do to survive. And who knows? There may be people out there that have done that. I don't know. Oh, another one that happened. I had we fought fire for almost 24 hours straight. We had done initial attack on a fire called the Skull Fire. And we literally went out and scalped ourselves some places to throw our sleeping bags at about 2 o'clock in the morning and caught 2 or 3 hours of sleep and got back up. But I remember waking up in the middle of the night and something heavy was walking through my camp and all my guys were asleep. And it was bipedal. It was on two legs. It was very heavy. And I opened one eye and looked and couldn't see anything. It was dark, it was black. But it walked right through the middle of my camp. And yeah, I don't know what that was either. So who knows, man? I've always thought I'm going to come around this corner and maybe today's the day, or be out in the boat and see one come down to the beach or something out of the woods. But, it hasn't happened. There's just so much stuff out there now.
The cool thing is that if you wanted to have that sighting or potentially that interaction, if you're on Prince of Wales Island, you're on one of the best places in the world to potentially have that happen.
Now, a friend of mine, one of the people I met when we first got there, and they've since left the island, but he was a retired sheriff's deputy from Sacramento County. Anyway, he told me that there was a canyon up in there that the native people don't go, but I don't know where that is. But he said there's a drainage or a canyon up in there where the natives absolutely won't go. I just remembered that, but I don't know where that is. Maybe I'll have to look in my contacts and see if maybe he's still in my contacts and still has the same phone.
That might be interesting, and it'd be interesting if anyone listening, they might be aware of where that is as well. If anyone has anything that they would want to share about Prince of Wales Island, you can always reach out to me. My email is bigfootsociety@gmail.com. But, Larry and Monica, just thank you guys for hanging out today. I really appreciate your time and sharing what you've heard and experienced over the years.
Yeah. If anything else happens, who knows? But if anything else happens, I'll pass it along to you. I would just love to get solid confirmation, like nobody wants to get jerked on and led across or some kind of group psychosis you're participating in. Like I would just love to know for sure. But this is all almost evidence stuff. Like a conversation down in the woods. I don't know. I don't know what else it could have been. I don't know.
To me, logically, I can't think of many other things that would do that, especially if it did sound like the Sierra sounds like you were saying. But yeah, I mean, if anything else comes up, you feel free to reach out, and you can always, if there's anyone you talk to, you can always feel free to pass on my info. Totally up to you. But as you said, it's kind of getting into the getting. You move to the island now. You have to kind of become part of the people that live there, and that might take a while for you to become a part of them in certain ways. But yeah, thank you guys for coming on the show today.
Yeah, certainly, man. You're welcome. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. Number 1, encounters from Franklin County, Texas. Number 2, encounters from the entire state of Iowa. Number 3, encounters from Oak Ridge, Oregon, or the surrounding area. Number 4, any individuals that know about Bigfoot being flown off after the Mount St. Helens eruption. Number 5, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter while in the military. Number 6, those that have had a Bigfoot encounter in the southern New Hampshire or north central Massachusetts area, including Franklin County, Massachusetts. Number 7, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter in a Bible camp or Boy Scout camp setting. Number 8, individuals that have had Bigfoot try to enter their house forcibly while they were living inside. Number 9, individuals that have actively have a Bigfoot living on their property. And lastly, any sightings that are in the Ouachita National Forest area of Oklahoma or Arkansas. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.